The clock ticked past midnight. David, hunched over his keyboard, was the only soul left in the office. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sterile glow on the deserted desks. Shadows stretched from the corners, twisting familiar shapes into ominous figures. David rubbed his tired eyes, the glow of the computer screen blurring. He just wanted to finish this last report and go home. He glanced at his reflection in the darkened window pane, his face pale and drawn. A wave of fatigue washed over him. David stretched, feeling a knot in his shoulder loosen. He returned his attention to the screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard, eager to be done. David paused, his brow furrowing, a sense of unease creeping over him. He thought he'd seen something strange in the reflection of the computer screen, something that didn't quite belong, a flicker, a distortion. He leaned closer, peering into the dark glass, trying to make sense of the anomaly. His reflection stared back, identical yet different. There was something off, something unsettling. A shiver ran down his spine. He shook his head, attributing it to fatigue and the late hour. He went back to his work, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity, the silence amplifying his unease. The silence of the office was broken only by the tapping of his keyboard and the low hum of the computer, a constant reminder of his isolation. He glanced back at the screen, his heart skipping a beat, the sense of dread growing stronger. The smile. It was back. This time there was no mistaking it. It was sinister, almost mocking. His reflection bore a chilling grin, a sight that sent a wave of terror through him. David pushed back from his desk, heart pounding. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls almost breathing. He needed to get out of this office. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if it was filled with invisible whispers. He grabbed his phone, a sense of dread washing over him. His hands were trembling, and he could feel the cold sweat forming on his brow. He decided to take a detour to the break room. Maybe a moment of solitude would help clear his mind. Maybe a change of scenery would help shake off the unsettling feeling. The flickering light in the break room did little to ease his nerves. As he entered the break room, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitantly answered, his voice barely a whisper. A distorted voice, barely a whisper, sent chills down his spine. Don't trust the reflection. The line went dead, leaving an eerie silence. David stared at his phone, his blood running cold. The words echoed in his mind, creating a sense of impending doom. He looked up at his reflection in the break room window. His heart skipped a beat. His blood ran even colder. The reflection wasn't him. It was something else, something sinister. It was grinning, a malevolent glint in its eyes. The reflection seemed to mock him, its eyes filled with a dark, unsettling glee. Panic surged through David, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He ran out of the break room, his breath catching in his throat, each step feeling heavier than the last. He had to get out of the building, now. The walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating his every thought. He sprinted towards the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, a haunting reminder of his isolation. The elevator arrived with a ding, and David rushed in, slamming his hand on the button for the ground floor, praying it would move faster. As the doors began to close, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished metal. It wasn't smiling anymore. It looked sinister. It was grinning, teeth bared in a grotesque mockery of his own, a twisted version of his face. And then, the reflection moved. It was no longer just a reflection. It had a life of its own. It reached out, its hand passing through the solid metal of the elevator door, defying all logic and reality. David watched in horror as the reflection pulled him in, his screams echoing in the confined space unheard by anyone. David found himself standing in the lobby, disoriented and gasping for breath. The elevator doors were still closed. He looked down at his hands, trembling. What just happened? He walked out of the office building and into the cool night air. As he passed a parked car, he glanced at his reflection in the window. His heart stopped. It wasn't him. The reflection was still grinning, its eyes cold and calculating, and it was wearing his clothes. David watched in abject horror as his doppelganger, now free from its confines, walked away down the street, leaving him trapped as a reflection in the mirror world. He was gone.